Welcome back, everybody, to The Truth About Addiction. Today's interview is with a really spectacular man named RJ Elizarraz. I can't wait to read his bio. I can't wait for you to hear this story. One of those miracles of the lowest kind of low, more than one, and the most beautiful high, the most beautiful outcome. A true testament to what is possible, even when the odds are stacked wildly against you. Here we go. RJ grew up in the Conejo Valley region of Southern California, just north of Los Angeles. He was raised in a healthy environment by loving and successful parents. By the time he was 17, he had been expelled from several high schools. 2 years later, he was a full-time drug addict. Over the next decade, a long, slow, drug-induced decline finally ended in homelessness. When he hit bottom, his friends had given up on him, and his family was exhausted. He turned his life around by doing everything his mind told him to resist. He opened himself up to a new way of living. He sought out others who had gotten clean and sober and followed their advice. He joined a 12-step program and made it his number one priority. In the process, a miracle occurred. His old sense of self-obsession gave way to a new purpose of helping others. He became completely committed to seeing others recover the way he did. His first venture was a high-structure men's sober living. The success of that home led to a women's sober living, and then a third sober living, which consists of 3 houses on one property, all gender specific. He now oversees the operation of 5 sober living homes in the Agoura, Westlake, Thousand Oaks area. To give even more help to people who are struggling with mental health and addiction, he opened a PHP IOP treatment center in Agoura, Westlake. RJ's continuing mission is to provide more and better support to people struggling with addiction and mental health problems. In his mission to help others, he also founded and runs a full-service digital marketing agency called Mad Rose Media, which has allowed him to not only provide best-in-class marketing services to medical professionals, but also offer job opportunities to recovered drug addicts in a safe and drug-free working environment. Wow. Please stay tuned for this incredible interview.
So tell me what you need, and tell me where you bleed, and I will listen. I can listen. Oh, I will listen to you.
Welcome, everybody, to The Truth About Addiction. I'm so excited for this interview today. I've been hunting down this man for weeks, and he is very busy and has a big, beautiful life. I know him from the Rooms of Recovery. I spoke at one of his very big bonfire meetings many months ago, and it's his turn to share his incredible story from addiction to recovery, but also some of the more difficult things that he navigates sober on a day-to-day basis, how he uses the tools and the steps to do this thing called life. RJ, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Thanks for continuing to hunt me down. And let's be honest, it wasn't weeks, it was months. And I'm just really glad to be here. And I'm glad that you stayed persistent. And you stay sober long enough, and you do enough good things in sobriety, and life gets big, right?
It sure is.
Yeah, I'm glad I was able to carve the time out and jump on here. I'm always happy to share my story and talk about what it takes to not only get sober but stay sober, and because sobriety is not just a walk in the park every day, right? So
oh God, Yeah. The best and hardest things that have ever happened to me have happened in my sobriety. But that's also because we're feeling it all.
Right.
And that's what it is to be alive. So I want to jump into your story because it's unbelievable. And the more unbelievable the story, I think the more hope we infuse to the listener that you can truly overcome anything, despite the trajectory you might be on at this very moment. So
Right.
please tell us how you got where you are. No
Yeah,
big deal.
yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long story, and there's a lot of different ways to tell it, I guess. And there's a lot of different little sub stories to go into. But I think my story ultimately really starts from, what is the background, right? It's like I grew up in an upper middle class family in Westlake Village, California. By all definitions, I had a really great life, right? Like I didn't come from, the mean streets or grew up in a trailer park or, um, I didn't have difficult circumstances as a kid, right? And yet I still became a severely drug addicted young adult, right? And I think that, if anything, if my story can translate, it's that idea that drug addicts and alcoholics are not just the homeless or the unfortunate, right? It affects every walk of life, no matter where you come from, no matter what your socioeconomic background is. And my story is interesting because it has such a wide range, right? From being somebody who grew up in, an affluent area and an affluent family, to being homeless and holding a cardboard sign, right? Um, and my journey was not linear, right? And it was messy and it was difficult and it came with a lot of victories and then followed by a lot of losses, right? And so I grew up in Westlake and with a great family. My parents got divorced when I was 7, and if you want to go back to like a childhood trauma event, that was probably it. That was probably a defining moment for me at 7. And I kind of I look back and I've analyzed my journey a lot, and I think at that point I started to retreat a little bit. Right, I wasn't maybe as active. I wasn't as engaged. And it's interesting. I really always went to the extremes from a pretty young age, and I remember when I was 15 and I was going to Westlake High School, me and all my friends had made this pact, right? We were like, I'm never going to do drugs, right? Like I took dare seriously, right? Like I was like people make fun of dare, but I was like that kid that like quietly was like, yeah, like that image of my brain on drugs, like, yeah, I'm definitely not doing that. Um, and me and all my friends were like, and I was like the leader of like the sober, not sober, I guess like straight edge, you know what I mean? Like pack, like, oh, we're never gonna do drugs, let's all, basically like make an oath. And what I found was, by the time I'm 15 and a half, is one friend at a time had started, smoking weed, right? And I'm like, oh, we can't be friends anymore, right? Like, oh, you're out of the group. And then it was like, one friend, two friend, three friend, four friend. Then it's just me and my best friend. And then I find out my best friend's cheating on me, right? He's like smoking weed behind my back and lying, right? And I'm like, I find out, and we had like, I mean, this was like serious. I remember it was dramatic, I was like blood oath time. And I'm like, yeah, we can't be friends anymore, man. You're out of the group. And I found myself in a group of one, right? And this is a defining moment for me in my journey, right? Because I'm 15 and a half. I just got my learner's permit. I just got my first car, and I've got no friends, right? And I'm hanging out at home with my mom. My mom's like cooking dinner, and I'm like hanging out with mom, and we were watching Weeds. It was like the irony, right?
Oh
We're watching
God.
Weeds, it was that time when Weeds was, it was out. It was like season 2 or something, right? And like me and my mom would like watch Weeds and like eat dinner. And at 15 and a half, when you're not hanging out with any of your friends and you're hanging out with your mom, that gets really depressing, right?
Mm.
And after a couple months, I found myself just extremely depressed. And and then so I decided I was going to smoke weed for the first time. It's funny because the reason why I did it was because I wanted to prove that if I inhaled this smoke, that it certainly wasn't going to make me act in a different way, right? I thought that was truly like just a matter of mental weakness, right? And I remember watching my friends, they'd smoke weed and they'd act all goofy and like act all silly and stupid. And I'm like, dude, like, I'm going to prove to you that, this is not going to affect my mind. Right. And I remember, we're at a friend's house. It's like the middle of the night. And Maury, you remember that talk show host,
Oh
Maury? Like,
yeah. I love it. We're in
okay.
the same age bracket and we're getting all the references right now. Thank
And
you.
so it's late night TV. It's like a Maury rerun, right? I don't know why, like Maury, we're watching Maury, right? And they take out this bong and they like milk this, big bowl, and they do it for me, right? And then they're like, here, and they put it up to my mouth and they're like, okay, clear it. And they're like, all right, hold it in. And I'm holding it in. And then, I blow it out, I'm coughing, my eyes are watering. There's like, I'm dying, right? And I remember sitting there for a minute and I'm looking at the screen and I'm watching Maury and I just start dying laughing, right? I don't even know what they're saying, right? Like, wah, 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 wah. Like, I am just dying, tears coming down my face.
Liberated. Okay.
It's like that one of those first times you ever get high and you're just like,
Yep.
it's there's no consequences. It's all fun.
Yep.
And I'm laughing so hard that my abs are hurting. They're like cramping, right? And then I go into the kitchen and clear out the fridge, clear out the freezer. And I remember so vividly, I found a pack of frozen peas and I'm just devouring the frozen peas. And I'm like,
Okay. Who does
guys,
that? First of all, I thought you were going to say cookies or a Hostess cupcake. Come on, but okay. Okay.
listen, I had found the promised land in these frozen peas. I was like, guys, you don't understand. Like, oh my God. Right. And that was my first time, getting high, right? And me, whatever that is that's in me, right, is, I'm extreme by nature. I'm trying to get out of this irritable, restless, discontented space that I'm always in. And I somehow think that going extreme in anything I do is like going to be the answer, right? And I had some catching up to do. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna, I want to buy all the weed, I want to buy all the bongs, I want to, be the best blunt roller, I want to roll the best joints, like I'm gonna be the guy, right? And
Can I ask
if you
you, did all those friendships come back? Was it like game on now?
yeah, they all came back. But here's the thing is like, as much as they all smoked weed and I stopped being friends with them, when I started to smoke weed, I lost them in a new way because I was way more extreme than them.
Yep. Yep.
Right. So, it was, I lack the ability to balance, right? Like I lack the ability to find the middle ground. And anything I did, I just went so extreme. And so, yeah, the friends came back for a moment, but then you look at the next, couple of years of my life, and I'm kicked out of Westlake High School. I go to a continuation school. I find a whole lot of harder drugs, right? I'm introduced to a whole lot of new things. The great thing about continuation school is that it was all kids just like me that all you like to use drugs the same way I did. And we had no homework and our days were like half as long, right? So it was like a playground to do whatever I wanted. And so my drug addiction started to excel at that point. I get kicked out of my second school. I go to my third continuation school. And, now I'm like the local drug dealer and, I'm supporting my habit. I'm running away from home. I'm getting a DUI. I'm crashing vehicles. I'm crashing on friends' couches. And
I ask you,
my
did your parents, like in the first continuation school, did they have an inkling of what was happening? Like, at what point were they going, wow, our son that we raised in this affluent neighborhood with a loving home is going sideways and flying off the rails? What was their level of awareness and or intervention, if any, as this was accelerating?
it was their level of awareness was obviously very high, right? Because I'm getting kicked out of school and my mom's having to show up. But you know, the difficult thing about having, divorced parents, and you got two different houses and a dad who works a lot and step kids and step families, and there's a lot of room to split and navigate and find your own way and get kind of maybe lost in the chaos of all of that, right? Because I go to my mom's house for 7 days, and then I go to my dad's house for 7 days, and it was really hard to create any level of, I think, containment around me.
Right.
And I think right, and I also think that I was highly manipulative and a really good talker, right? Like I wasn't like a terrible kid, right? Like by all, like I wasn't, you look at all the things, but I was a very, nice kid, right? Like my friends' parents would call me Eddie Haskell, right? Like from that old, show, right? Like I could present really well. Like all my friends' parents loved me. Like everyone, like you're like I was such a nice kid, and I could play that really well. And so I think I just, always, manipulated, found a way, and, just kept doing what I wanted to do. And they would try to, intervene on me. We'd go to dinners and we'd have meetings and we'd, do all sorts of things. And I'd make all sorts of, promises, and this time's going to be different, and give me one more chance, and this is what I'm going to do, and there would be glimmers of hope, right? Like my first continuation school, I had straight A's, right? Like straight A's, and I would do super well, and then there'd be like one cataclysmic event that would be like, you're expelled, right? So there was always like this big upside for a period of time, and then I would tear it down, right? And then there'd be a big upside, and then I'd tear it down, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, by the time I'm, 19, I'm like full blown like drug dealer. Parents had no control over me because I was, making all my own money and living in my own apartment.
Okay, your
What
own.
was that? Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, living on my own. I basically like I didn't really live at home from like 17 onward, right? So from 17 onward, they didn't have, there wasn't a lot of ability to control my actions, right?
Right.
And I found a way to, I always found a way to make money, right? And I was able to, support myself, and by selling weed and selling drugs, and and where that wound me up is, I'm 19 years old, and I've been robbed at gunpoint by some people, and they've taken everything, and I owe these guys a bunch of money. And I had a friend who I knew was getting all these Oxycontin prescriptions from these crooked doctors back during that whole, Purdue Pharma scandal, right? That we've seen all these documentaries about now. That was the time when I was like 19 and 19, 20, and you could go to these crooked doctors in the San Fernando Valley, and you pay them under the table, and you tell them what you wanted, and they would just write you these huge prescriptions, right? And you could go doctor shopping. So you go to multiple doctors, you just go to multiple pharmacies, and they would just fill these ridiculous prescriptions, right? So I had a friend I knew was doing that. He brought me in. I got a bunch of prescriptions, and I remember the first time we went, he stops at Little Caesars to get a hot and ready because he wanted pizza, and and my friend is like deep in it, right? Like he's taking oxys and using black tar heroin every day, and I had never tried it at this point, and he crushed one of the pills up and he snorted it, and I was like, oh, I want to try that, and he was like, oh no, no, dude, and it was like the warning I didn't heed, right? And again, it was like the same sort of attitude I had about smoking weed, right? It was that same sort of like, I'm like, what do you mean don't try it? And he's like, listen, dude, trust me. I'm totally addicted. You'll get addicted. You won't be able to stop. It's like the worst hell on the planet. Like, and he was telling me the truth, right? And I looked at him and I'm like, addicted? Like, come on, man. What do you mean? Like, I'm not, come on, dude. Like, I'm a lot stronger than that. Like, I'm not gonna, I'm not some homeless drug addict, dude. Like, I'm not gonna be addicted, right? Just all these different prejudices I had in my mind, and you know, who I, thought I was, and dabbling in things I knew nothing about. And he goes into Little Caesars, and I take one of the pills, and I crushed it up, and I just, imitated what he did. And by the time he came out, I'm sitting in this, the front seat of his car, and like, practically drooling on myself. And, for the first time in a number of years, after dealing with all that chaos, being kicked out of schools and just, really being a hellion, right? I felt a level of comfort and peace and quietness in my mind that I had not felt before. And it washed over me, and I was like, this is it. This is one of the greatest things I've ever tried. And knowing nothing about what I was about to get into, having no idea the sort of Chinese finger trap I was sticking my finger in. And over the next couple weeks, I'm taking oxys every day, and I try to stop, and I get like flu symptoms, and I'm freaking out, right? And I call my buddy, and I'm like, and he's like, dude, I try to tell you, you're strung out, and that was my first real experience of being totally stuck, and that my own willpower did not suffice, right? It was like, as try as I might, I was not going to pull my finger out of this trap, right? And I remember that feeling hit me. Funny because as an ex drug addict, it's like, I want the relief, right? But once I get it and I'm stuck, all I want is to get out, right? And God, that was my first experience of that, and it was so frightening. And then by the time I'm 20 and about to turn 21, I've been strung out for 6 months, and I started using black tar heroin, and my life was just falling apart, right? Like, I'm losing control of everything. And my parents now get involved. I end up admitting the truth to my mom and dad, and I desperately wanted help, right? Like, I was not one of those young adults that was using, and he was like, F you, like, I'm gonna keep using. Like, I desperately wanted to be free of it, right? Like, I loved it, but then once I started and couldn't stop, I'm like, holy shit, please help me, right? And so dad ends up finding a treatment center in Utah, northern Utah, and it was kind of this it was owned by this Mormon guy, and so it had a lot of Mormon kind of ideologies in it. And I think my dad just like researched on Google like best treatment centers in Utah, and he was called a few. And my dad's like kind of a health freak. He like runs marathons, does triathlons, like he's always been that way his whole life. And so he loves the idea when he hears like no caffeine and no nicotine and no sugar and no sodas, and I'm like going to this place where they've just stripped everything away, like no white bread, right? And I get there, and I was super desperate. I had no I didn't have any sort of protest to any of this. I was like, please just get me there. And I got there. I'm supposed to be there for 30 days, right? Supposed to do like month of treatment. And I get there. I remember being super scared. I've never detoxed before. I see the doctor. I go through this just hellish detox. And by day 14, 13, 14, I felt amazing, right? First time in many months that RJ's like free, dude. Like, I was like, oh my God, I'm free, right? I was I was like just levitating, right? Like pink cloud, whatever. Like I was totally levitating. I was so happy, right? That I was free and I felt so good. And so what did I do with that? I packed up my bags.
Of course.
I
Yeah.
pack I pack up all my things and I go to the front office and I'm like, hey guys, I've told the story so many times. I'm like, honestly, I was like, 5-star review. You guys are incredible. You listen, you thought you could do it in 30 days. You got it done in 14. Okay. And they're like, they're like, yeah, that's not how this works. And I'm like, yeah, I'm an adult. If you could just give me my phone and my wallet, like I'm gonna leave. And they're like, that's gonna be an AMA against medical advice. I'm like, listen, you can call it whatever you want. I am leaving. And I go outside this front door, and it's northern Utah in January, right? So, feet of snow. It's freezing. I'm in the middle of freaking nowhere. And I power up my phone and, call my dad. And, basically the only thing he says is like, you're homeless, click, right? And and so, sheepishly I have to like turn around and I'm like knocking on the door. And I don't want to tell them that my dad's told me no. And I'm like, yeah, so like I've been kind of reconsidering, maybe I should just maybe I should just, like maybe I don't know, it's just 2 more weeks. Like maybe I just kind of had some time to think about it. And I remember the clinical director had the door open like just a crack, and she's like, oh really? Is that what happened? I mean, obviously they're all talking to my parents, right? And I'm like, yeah, 'cause I don't want to tell her that my dad said no. I'm like trying to maintain control. We played this dance
Oh
for like
man.
we played this dance for like 5 minutes, right? And then she's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to go back through the admissions process. I'm like, yeah, whatever we gotta do. If we gotta sign some paperwork, like let's just speed it up. And so she brings me in and we go into the office. And I remember it was kind of like this come to Jesus meeting, and you've got a speakerphone in the middle of the desk. And there's like my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister, like everyone's on the speakerphone. And they're like, all right, so well, now we know a little bit more about you. And so if you're going to come back in, it's no longer 30 days. You're going to have to stay here for 60 days. And tomorrow is day one. And I'm like, I'm 21. I'm like, this is like a life sentence,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God. But I knew like, okay, RJ, stop fighting, because the more you fight, the more you try to run the show, the worse this gets. It's like a whole new different type of Chinese finger trap. It's like, oh my God, just like lay it down, dude. You would have been home in 2 weeks. Now you're not going home for 2 months. Like, lay down the sword. And so I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like, let's do it. And they were like, that's not it. After the 60 days, you're then going to do 6 months of a sober living in Salt Lake City. And so it's funny, this was the first time in my life where, when I was, trying to fight against things, it was the first time where I got real surrender, right? I was like, oh my God, RJ, just stop fighting anything and everyone. And, my 2 more weeks turned into 8 more months in about 30 minutes. Right. And that was really good for me. It was probably one of the best things that happened to me. Because I really, it was, a high level of consequences, that put me in place. And I really hadn't had that level of consequence, so far in my life. And I surrendered to it, and I had an amazing experience, right? I was like, I loved it. The entire 8 months, I had, one of the greatest times of my life, and made tons and tons of friends, sober fun. But I had this real protestation against spiritual principles, right? I was brought to my first AA meeting, and it was like a classic movie set. We're in northern Utah. It's cold out. It's dark. It's winter. We're going into the basement of a church, right? It's like, basements, up in Utah. And because it's northern Utah, these are like all the ranch folk, right? So there's all these like ranchers there, like older, burly kind of dudes, like not my crowd, right? Like I'm like an LA kid, middle upper class family, right? Like 21 years old. And I'm walking to the basement of this church. There's pinging fluorescent lights. There's like bad stale coffee in the corner, white plastic tables, folding steel chairs, and these dudes that are like, maybe one of them's missing teeth, and one, it's like, and I remember when it got to me, and I had this like super prophetic share. I thought, I'm like, you're all alcoholics because you keep saying you're alcoholics, right? And I had this like long pitch on, you need to stop affirming that you're an alcoholic, right? And the best way I could describe it is I looked at 12-step programs like public transportation. The way, if you grew up in LA, the way we look at transportation in LA is like, we don't, you don't ride the bus, you buy your own car, right? I think the bus is great. I think it's really, really good for a lot of people, right? But thank you. I'm going to work hard and just buy my own car. That's how I viewed 12-step programs, right? I thought it was really great for people who just need that sort of access, but not me, right? And this was that ego thing of me separating myself from other people, right? And I come to find out that.
What was your faith at that point? What was your
no
belief
faith
about God?
Yeah,
Okay,
no.
so was that a big repellent for you to hear the language of God through the steps, or not necessarily?
No, I didn't have any sort of, bad experience. I was a blank slate, right? Like, I don't think I put much thought into it, right? I was not like by any means some kid that was like, I'm an atheist, or I don't believe in God, or, screw God. I just was kind of like, the God thing didn't bother me. I grew up going to church, rarely, like on Christmas or like different things like that, like at a Christian church. My family doesn't come from like, we don't pray before dinner. Like it just was just kind of a
It's
thing.
just
Like,
like,
yeah,
I'm fully self-reliant and I'm good in that department and I don't need this. It was more like I'm in full control of figuring this out for myself.
yeah. It was like, the God thing was like, I'm sure there's a God out there. Totally. Like, I don't deny it. I don't have proof of it. I'm sure there's God. Like, I don't mind God language. I'm not a devout believer. I'm not a non-believer. I'm just a agnostic, right? But it was it wasn't the God idea that pushed me out. It was the I viewed it. I viewed 12-step programs as, like I said, like a free public service that I just didn't need, right? Like, it was kind of like food halls at churches that feed the homeless, right? Like I think it's really good. I think it's really good charitable work. I think it's amazing. I just don't need it, right? And so, like you said, it was like, I'm gonna, what I need to do is I need to not use drugs again. I should probably not do anything extreme, and in the terms of substances. And I just need to work and make money and become successful. I just need to be I wanted to be a successful person, right? So,
Can I ask
after
you,
that,
because when I think back now, to all the factors that made me feel anti-AA for literally the first 4 years I was in program, the God stuff was a big part of it. But also I've come to understand that I had some, first of all, hardwiring towards perfectionism, where it was like, I had been shown again and again that if I did X, Y, and Z, I would have this wonderful outcome. Like, of my own volition, under my own willpower, I could make all these like wonderful things happen. And that was reaffirmed by my mother, whose word in my house was God, who said the only person you can count on is yourself. So I now understand, all these years later in recovery, that part of my repulsion at the steps was I literally had been brought up to believe that relying on anything outside of myself is weak, pathetic, for people who are not intelligent enough. When you think back to, clearly you've described like your actual disposition from the jump was like this all or nothing, like I fucking got this. So I think there's some level of hardwiring embedded in there. But do you feel like when you reflect back on childhood, and not necessarily something traumatic, but just the things you were learning about how to navigate in the world, like, was that one of the teachings that like, you can do this, yourself.
Yeah,
You
I
are
mean,
fully capable. You do not need outside help. Like was that reinforced?
yeah, I guess, here's the thing. It wasn't that I didn't have, like, when I went to rehab, right? I actually really loved therapy. I loved therapists. I loved groups. I loved learning. I, I'm somebody that I think from a young age, I really did like outside help, right? I just liked, I guess, a certain level of like professional outside help, if that makes sense. Like I needed to respect the the intelligence of that outside help, right? So, I think I put that on the pedestal, right? It was like, what is the intelligence behind who this is that's providing me help, right? And I saw the 12 steps or AA as like a homeless shelter or something. You know what I mean? Like I just didn't see it as a very intelligent group, right? I just saw it as, a bunch of people that, maybe couldn't afford, other outside help, needed to go to these groups to hear each other talk and support each other in a way. Like, and I hate using like homeless shelter. I put it in that category, right? And when I think about, the way I was raised, my parents, I think since I was born, always told me like, oh, you can do absolutely anything, right? You can do anything. You can be anything. You can do anything. They like really instilled that in me. And so I think there was a combination of like, I looked at, I really admired professionals. I really admired smart people. I really liked to learn. And I really wanted to be successful. And I thought if I was successful in work, in making money, in business, that, the sobriety thing and all these other things was going to, work itself out perfectly, right? That just money and success and power, prestige, that was, for me, in my mind at least, that was the true ideal sober self, right? Um, does that like properly kind of explain it? Like I didn't come out the gate with like, oh, I don't need help, or F God, or these different things. It was like I saw myself as better than 12 steps. I saw myself as better than the people in there. And I really admired people who I, thought were highly educated or really smart, right? And I put a major, major emphasis on I just need to be successful. I need to work really hard and make a lot of money, and all my problems will be solved.
Yeah, it sounds like some of it was a combination of just like the environment and what you had learned about prestige and what the definition of prestige looks like, and also that you had preconceived notions, like I did, like most of us do, about what an alcoholic looks like, smells like, sounds like, and this sort of othering that we do when we have
Right.
a semblance of a life left over, when we hit a bottom and we come into those rooms, especially when they're dank and dark and they look nothing like the places we've come from. And we're like, oh, hell no, no,
Right.
absolutely not. So yeah, I think you definitely answered that question. Mhm.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, where were we? Oh yeah, so I'm in Utah. Yeah, so I'm in Utah. And I finished the 8 months out there, and had a great time. Like loved it. And came back home, started working, got a job in sales, and did really, really well, right? Like I stayed sober, what I call dry now, for it was like 4.5 years. And in that time, I got the girlfriend back that broke up with me because I was using drugs. And, we're engaged in this super young, like toxic relationship. Like, we break up and get back together and break up and get back together. And then she gets pregnant and we're like, oops. And she's like, I want to keep it. I'm like, okay, you gotta move in with me. And she's like, I'm not moving in unless you marry me, and so we drive to Vegas on the weekend, get married in Vegas. I'm like 20, I'm 23, 24.
Mm.
And, we get married in Vegas, like basically tell nobody. Drive back home. I end up, buying us a house. We move into this house, have my daughter, and I'm like, what, 4 years, just over 4 years sober. And we go out to a restaurant, and I'm like, I was not an alcoholic, right? Like alcohol really wasn't my problem. And I just needed to not use drugs. And I remember just being totally discontent with my life, right? Like just totally discontent. I was not, happy about anything. And I had all this stuff. I had like cars, I bought a motorcycle, I'm married, I have a kid, I've got a great job, I'm making good money, and doing better than all my friends at 24, right? Way ahead of the game. And it was like it was all ego, man. I had a massive inferiority complex, and used money, property, and prestige to try to make myself feel better and to try to get approval from others. And the more I got, the worse I felt, right? It never fit the bill. And I found myself at 4.5 years with all this stuff and this, cool, great life from the outside, totally isolated, totally alone in my own head. Nobody knew who I was. I either looked up at everybody or looked down at everybody, right? And that's a really painful place to be. And I remember, the great obsession of every alcoholic is we watch others drink with impunity, right? And maybe one day that can be me, right? And I remember watching, my family and friends and people would go out and have fun, and I didn't have fun, right? I just worked, and I go to the gym and I come home. I just, all work, no play. You know what I mean? And after, 4 years, I'm like, I think I can have a glass of wine, right? And why did I want the glass of wine? I didn't want a glass of wine because I just wanted to chill and have a glass of wine. I wanted a glass of wine because I wanted relief, right? I wanted relief. And I remember having this glass of wine, drank it slowly over the course of a meal, and we leave the restaurant, and I didn't really like wine, right? Like wine wasn't my thing. And like drinking one glass of wine, like, what is this, right? And it was like, maybe a week later, I was like, okay, maybe it's beer. Maybe I need some Heineken, right? And so I bought a 6-pack of Heineken, and I'm in my garage. I'm like working on my motorcycle. I've got the Lakers versus Celtics game on. It's the finals, 2012. And I drink 2 beers, drink another couple beers like a couple days later. So I spaced it out, and same feeling. Like, why do people drink 2 beers? Why do people drink a 6-pack? Right? Like, I don't know. Like that does nothing for me. Right. And so, I go on Facebook and I find an old friend, and I'm like, hey, can you get me like a pill, like an Orco or an Oxy or something? Cause I'm like, I'm just going to, now I know better. Just don't use every day. Just, take one like you would drink a beer. Right.
Ask you, in this space where you're, what we now know is like relapsing, right? And also for anyone listening who's new to sobriety, or they're sober curious, as the kids are saying, which I love, by the way. Dry means you're abstaining physically from substances, mind-altering substances, but you're not in a 12-step program or getting any kind of toolkit to navigate, to have a defense essentially between you and your emotional state. So the thing that you were doing to anesthetize is gone, but now every single thing that happens to you, every curveball life throws, every feeling you get is just completely disruptive, and you don't have any way to sort of reckon with it in a healthy manner. And so you had been, though you weren't going to program, exposed to program. You had been in a sober living. You had had that wonderful time in your life. Was there any inner knowing inside of you as you were on this relapse that was like, this is not going to end well, or I don't know if we should be doing this, or if you call to get that pill, remember when you were withdrawing and how nightmarish that was there, there's that thing that we say in program, like, or in general, once you see something, it's really hard to unsee it. Was that there for you at all?
I think it was, because I didn't, I was out of sober living and I went to rehab and, but um, I think it was, when I really think about it, yeah, there was like that little voice, like that was like, this is, dangerous, right? But after 40 plus years and the level of discomfort that I felt, right?
That
Uh,
overload.
yeah, I mean, when you're in that level of discomfort, right? That like that this is maybe a bad idea is such a tiny, tiny voice.
Mhm.
And, doing this dangerous thing, right? This like risky thing, at least for me, right? Like gave me a sense of excitement or something, It was like after 4 plus years of feeling, you know, I don't know, just being kind of miserable, I guess. Um, there was a level of excitement and maybe freedom on the other side that was just so much more overpowering than the idea of like, in I so quickly that voice that was like, this is not a good idea. I was like, oh no, 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 dude, you're totally fine because you know better now, right? Like you got all the education, like you got stuck before, now right? You just can't use every day, right? So it was like it was very easily and quickly rationalized, right? And the council, right? The council in my head was like, the other voices are like, no, 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 no. Listen, RJ, we got it handled. We're professional now. You know what I mean? You know what you're doing. You went to rehab. It was almost like having that sobriety and going to rehab was like the reason why it was okay, right? And I think that's the strange mental twist of the alcoholic, right? Um, if I'm not, working a program and staying in, the constant working with others and helping, I will enter that place, right? I will enter that place where my own mind, I have a disease that talks to me in my own voice, right? Who else has a disease that talks to them in their own voice, right? I think that's the incredible, cunning, baffling thing about alcoholism or drug addiction, right? It's a disease that exists in your own mind, that talks to you in your own voice, and is the greatest salesperson you'll ever come up against, right? Because it's you and it knows your entire history. It knows everything about you and it uses all of that internal information to convince you of some wild, wild things, right?
My God,
And
I want to say something about that right now. There's so much coming up, and I know there's like a lot more to talk about, but do you know anything about internal family systems? It's a therapeutic principle, like a psychotherapy
maybe
principle.
a bit, but you can remind me.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not a psychologist, but I am so fascinated by any type of outside help. And I've been reading, besides the AA literature, spiritual literature and things that can sort of help me evolve for over a decade. And so I'm not going to go into what the full-blown thing, but essentially there's this idea that there are parts of us in everyone, right? There are parts of us, and even the non-addict, I've come to learn, have these voices inside of them, right? So when I think now at 14 years sober about the parts of who I am, I picture in my mind a boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And all the different parts of me are sitting around at the table. My procrastinator, my people pleaser, my
The judger.
controller,
Yeah.
perfectionist, right? And then if I'm spiritually fit, my capital S self, which we will call like my intuitive self, my most authentic, most honest, highest level of consciousness self is the CEO of my life
Mm-hmm.
when I'm spiritually fit, right? Which if I don't stay connected to that through a 12-step program in my case and therapy, then at any given moment, in my case, also, it would be the perfectionist / the controller. She wants to come in and be CEO. And it's like in every 24-hour situation. And so it's almost like, because there was nothing in between you, like no spiritual barrier between you and the world, these parts of you that weren't the highest parts of you were so loud. They were so confronting and totally taking over as CEO, being like, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. And your intuition, which I think the 12 steps bring me closest to, is like that intuitive, like the highest, most divine part of who I am. That is like my main goal for working the 12 steps every 24 hours, because I feel the most connected to the best part of myself as a result of working with them. I feel connected to God as I understand him, her, it, whatever it is. And if you're not working those steps, if I'm not working those steps, then I'm completely out of touch with that part of myself. And that part of myself would have very little to say at the boardroom table. And it would not be sitting in the seat of CEO, some other louder part of me, right? So it's really interesting, because I do think like the more science there is to uncover sort of at the brain level of what's happening with addiction, like the more interesting it really becomes, because it is cunning and baffling, absolutely, but there's also real sort of brain chemistry shit that's going on. Another really interesting example is this willpower idea, and I think the general public really still gets confused about addiction and our ability to just stop if we are having a hard enough go. You know, you've lost all these things, you got kicked out of school, you're homeless, your parents are cutting you up, like, can't you just stop? And now there's a bunch of information that when we are on a brain level emotionally dysregulated, the part of the brain that controls willpower is the first to go offline. So then here we are, you're not working a 12-step program, you're restless, irritable, you're discontent, you're fucking miserable, you have no support system. So the part of your brain that would love to be capable of staying in control, that's telling you it's going to be fine, literally cannot do that job.
Right.
And you don't have a 12-step program that's keeping you close to the voice that's like, uh-oh, this is dangerous. So
for sure,
game the fuck on. And I just wanted to bring that stuff up, because I think it's been really fascinating for me over the years to, like, because I love science and I'm so interested in the merger of science and spirit. I'm like, well, let's like demystify this a little bit. Like, because it doesn't mean I have any more control over it at all, because I'm a certifiable fucking addict. And if I drink and use again, I will die. Clear as day on that. But to be able to go, oh my God, no wonder it looked the way it does. No wonder when I'm not working a 12-step program, it looks the way it does. No wonder these voices come in and want to try and redirect my life when I have nothing to protect me, because there's all this shit like actually going on in my brain, and why my brain does these particular things and other people's do not. I have no fucking idea, you know, a wonderful combination of like nature and nurture, most likely. But I just think it's really interesting to like have a big conversation about what you're talking about, you know, because I remember sitting in those rooms and being like, also feeling like this business of just like the word disease, the word, like these things were so elusive to me. And just to be able to be like, oh, there's all this shit happening in my brain centers. And that makes so much sense why some things speak so loudly and other things don't, and why I lose actual control, even when I swear to God, this time I can keep it under control. So I just wanted to, like, you know, just broaden the lens on what you're saying right now, based on things that I've read that I find really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the whole council in your mind, it's the CEO got fired, right? The CEO just, he lost his board seat, he lost his
Yeah.
vote, and he was pushed out of the conference room, and he's
Yeah.
standing on the other side of the glass, banging on the glass, and
Yeah.
you can just hear a muffled, scream, and while everyone else, elects a new CEO, and they all vote on, all right, we're taking control now, right? And yeah, I think there is a very interesting cross section between, science, brain chemistry, and spirit, addiction, right? It's a fascinating thing because there's so many, different layers uh, to recovery and sobriety, right? Because it's not, a standard disease, right? It's such a fascinating disease, right? Um,
So
it's not like,
I want to like, because your sober story is also just so goddamn incredible. I know, like, this was the beginning of a great relapse, right? And so
mhm.
take me through like how quickly shit went down this time around, and how on earth you got from this second bottom to the life you're living right now.
Well, so this is the second bottom, and I have three bottoms in my story, right? This is the beginning of the rodeo, right? So, uh, I quickly find myself after, buying this 6 pack of Heineken, and then going on Facebook and finding an old friend. He's like, I can't get pills, but I can get black tar heroin. And I'm like, it's kind of the same thing. So and of course, I'm going to buy some, if I'm going to do this illegal thing, I might as well buy enough and never buy it again. So Costco wholesale, let's buy $1,000 worth of heroin. And I get a bunch of heroin, and, fast forward a little bit, 90 days later, I've lost my house. I've lost my job. I've lost my wife. There's a restraining order against me. I can't see my kid, and I am homeless in Simi Valley. I'm carrying a cardboard sign, and I wrote on the sign, I said, wife and kid at home, anything helps, God bless. And I was like a clean, homeless person, shave, shower, and Starbucks bathrooms, wear a button up shirt, holding a cardboard sign, basically not like I'm not homeless. I just am down on my luck, and I just need some money to pay rent. Right. And people were just giving me, tons of money. And, I'm homeless for a number of months, and in and out of, really terrible, low bottom, halfway houses, and shooting speedballs. And, I'm like 120 pounds. I've got an abscess on my left wrist, and I'm about to die. Right. I probably overdosed more times than I can count, and by some miracle made it through. And this guy that owns a sober living in Newbury Park, who works a real deal serious 12-step program, pulls me out of a Motel 6, and he's like, you can come with me right now. uh if you hesitate, I'm going to leave you. This is your one opportunity. And I was like, all right. I went with him. Put me on his couch. It was a cold turkey detox, like worst detox of my entire life. I don't think I slept for like 2 weeks. And he was like, the conditions on living here are, you're going to get a sponsor. Yeah, you're going to make this number one priority of your life, and you're going to sponsor other guys. Right. And I'm like, at the time I'm so desperate. I'm homeless. I've got nothing. I'm like, absolutely, I'll do whatever it takes. And you know, I get a sponsor. I get almost to my fifth step. I'm probably like 75, 80 days sober, and the incredible recuperative powers of the ego come back. And I'm like, hey, this AA stuff's great. I actually really do like it. Love my sponsor. I'm going to continue doing this stuff, but I need to get a job. I need to make money, and I need to hire an attorney, and I need to like do all sorts of things. I got real life problems I got to solve. And everybody there was like, don't do that, dude. Don't get a job. Don't focus on money. Like, just dude, just stay sober, work the steps, like just get all the way through. Everything else is going to work out. And I thought they were just totally insane. And I thought that was like, I'm like, it's easy for you to say, you know what I mean? Like, you're not living in my life. You're just telling me to like literally do nothing. Like, that's not going to happen. And I ended up getting a job at this tech company down in Beverly Hills and moving out to Hollywood and leaving the sober living after 90 days. And I, on my way out, I'm like, I'm going to call my sponsor tomorrow, right? I'm going to come back to the meetings, next week. And of course, once I get down to this new life, I'm like, well, it's a transition. I'm like, I really got all this work I got to do. I'll call my sponsor next week. I'll go to the meeting next week. Next week turns into 2 weeks, turns into a month, turns into 6 months, turns into 3.5 years later, right? And another 3.5 years, I'm living out in Hollywood. I'm dry. I did not ever call my sponsor again, never went back to another meeting again. And I found myself in the exact same spot again, right? I've got all the things, I got all the stuff, I've made some money, I've got this cool life, and I'm going out to this day bar called the Bungalow in Santa Monica. And with friends, all my friends were just normal people that would just drink and party, and I would just hang out with them and not do that. And someone walks up, hands me a drink, and I'm like, you didn't even think, start drinking. And then I'm drinking and doing blow. And I call my old dealer and end up getting some heroin again and detonate my life again. Right. So it's to build your life up and then tear it down within a matter of 2-3 months, and then build your life up again and then tear it down again within 2 to 3 months, is such a humbling experience, right? And it gave me such a reality check, because I had the proof at this point that my way does not work, right? And I was really tired of working so hard for years to lose it all within months, right? I was just like, I'm 27, 28 years old. I was over it. I was like, man, this is just not working and I don't know what to do. And I found myself, coming back to Westlake Village and going back to, sober living again. And they're like, you're going to get a sponsor. You're going to do the work like your life depends upon it. You're going to sponsor other guys. And, I sat across from this dude in the sober living who was the sober living manager, and he was a couple years younger than me. And I was so defeated and I was so broken, and I had no ego left. I was willing to like sweep hallways for the rest of my life. I was just like, dude, I don't care. I do not care. And I was completely leveled. I was completely broken. And this dude's sitting across from me. And I remember for a moment, I was like, oh, he's younger than me and he's got 6 months sober. Like, how's this kid going to help me? And he sat there and he talked about that he had a God in his life that had, restored him to sanity. And he was the happiest he'd ever been. And he used drugs the same way I did. He was from Tennessee. And I don't know, man. I genuinely believed him, and I saw a genuine freedom in a dude who was like living in this, kind of shitty sober living. He was the house manager, small life, you know what I mean? And he had an ego like mine, like he, smart guy, like to be a successful person, but was totally content. Right? I was like, how is that possible? Right? Like, how is that possible? And I wanted it. I really, really wanted it. I wasn't. And so I started doing the step work as a man on fire, someone who, like a man who was drowning. Right. And I really wanted it. Right. Like I really wanted what he had. I just wanted to be free. I wanted to be happy. I didn't want things. I wanted to be happy, and I had a real experience. I did the step work like it was a full-time job, and I got through my steps in 90 days, and I started sponsoring a ton of guys, and I had a kind of like a white light experience, right? And became super connected to other human beings. And I truly believe, after going through all the things that I've gone through and having had the experiences I've now had, that the opposite of addiction is connection for sure, right? And that connection is on so many different levels, right? Like connection to a power greater than yourself, right? Connection to your fellow man, right? Connection to a community at large, right? There is layers of connection that I believe, when all are created, the freedom that then is achieved from alcoholism and addiction is always found, right? Is like always found. And I remember I was driving to my home group meeting in the morning, and I had gotten my first sponsee, and I remember just driving, and the song came on the radio, and I'm just, tears are running down my face, and I knew I had arrived, right? It was like that feeling the first time I smoked weed, that feeling the first time I did an Oxycontin, that peace, that ease, that calmness, right? That I had been always searching, that I always wanted, that I never thought I could ever achieve without drugs and alcohol, had finally hit me. And it hit me in a sustainable way, right? It wasn't fleeting. I didn't need to go buy another pill to achieve it again, right? It was there, and it remained. It was, I felt the nearness of my creator, whatever that is, right? The sunlight of the spirit, the being rocketed into the fourth dimension, as people in the 12-step program say, right? I had understood for the first time a new way of living, a new sense of peace and ease. And, I was like, I'm going to make this my whole life, man. This is all I'm going to do. I don't care about anything else. I will chase this feeling until the end of time, because it was so incredible.
How
It was so
sober are
incredible.
you now?
What was that?
How sober are you now?
Well, I'll be taking 7 years, February 7th. So yeah, so my sober date is February 7th of 2017.
We have very
Yeah.
close birthdays, actually.
When's your
And
birthday?
February 28th.
Oh, really? I feel like February is a really good time to get sober. Like it just there's a lot of people that have February birthdays. I feel like October, right? It's like going to right before the holidays, and then you got February right after the holidays.
Yeah.
It's like
It tells
that's
you
where
about the person.
it was. My real birthday is January 15th, right? And I remember like that last birthday was terrible, right? I was like, I had started using it at that point. It was just Christmas was terrible. Thanksgiving was bad. Christmas was bad. My birthday was just catastrophic. And then it was like, 3 weeks after my birthday, it was totally burnt, and I like threw in the white towel, the white flag. So yeah, February, man. There's a lot of good February birthdays. I know I have a lot of friends that have February sober birthdays.
Okay, so here's one thing I just want to say before I want to ask you a question is what you're touching on. And I have a book coming out next year, and I talk about this a lot in the book. Something you just can't explain to anybody, and it does not matter if you're an addict or not. The level of spiritual bankruptcy that you had to reach in order for you to be done came when it came. And no matter how many external things had been taken from you, it was a full-blown internal feeling of utter desperation that landed when it landed, and you were lucky enough to be alive from all those overdoses to experience it. So much so that it puts you into action that would eventually save your life and ultimately save other people's lives. So as much as we out there in the world, are tired of living a certain way, and we're in these old patterns that we're operating in from God knows what we saw in childhood and trauma responses and you name it, until we are done,
Yeah.
done, exhausting those circuitries, we will keep doing it. And nobody outside of you can tell you when or how that's ever going to happen. And you may never feel it. I fucking pray to God, if you are listening and you are struggling, that before it is too late, you get that level of desperation that RJ, you have been granted and that I have been granted. And Lord knows it took me a long time too in recovery. And somehow I didn't relapse or die before I experienced it, because so many of us do. So I just want to say that that's a very personal journey. And then second to that, I want you just to tell people like what you're doing now. What is your life right now today? When you get off of this podcast with me, what are you going to do?
Yeah, what am I going to do? Well, there's, a couple of cases that we're working on right now that are, a couple of kids are being interventioned on right now, and we're going to go have to talk with those parents. And
because
I'm going to go
you
tour.
do what? Because you do what?
Yeah. So today, somehow have found myself through, that experience of that early sobriety, that 90-day, I started sponsoring people. I made that my whole life and ended up, buying a house in old Agoura. And, I moved my sponsees in for fun and for free. And, developed this routine and this structure. And, 6 months later, I had 12 guys living there, just word of mouth, and getting them all sober, sponsoring like 90% of the people there. I lived there, was the only person that ran it. It started to become a real deal 12-step structured sober living. At the end of year one, full house. Year two, opened up a women's sober living, hired a great staff to run that place. And then at the same time, I also started a media company, so a full service digital media marketing agency in my condo living room with people I knew from recovery, and then was giving job opportunities to the kids that were graduating from the sober livings. And so today, almost 7 years later, we've got a full service digital media marketing agency that I run and oversee, and then also founded and oversee a young adult, high structure, 12-step based treatment center in Westlake Village that has 4 houses, a full clinical curriculum, a full team of clinicians, and a massive, massive sober community, right? And so all the elements of Oak Forest is my heart and soul. It came from the experience I had. And we have this bonfire meeting, which you spoke at, right? That we get 200 plus people that show up every Thursday, and we feed everyone. There's live music, and it's this awesome, cool thing, right? And it's Oak Forest has become something that I'm just so incredibly proud of, and that I love. I love so much, and so many great people have come onto the journey. And I'm a small piece of what the whole thing is. I was the guy that started it, and I'm kind of the culture person, but I'm a small piece to what is now a very big organization with a lot of really, really incredible people that do really, really incredible work. And I'm just I'm living an extra credit, man. I this shouldn't be the life that I live based upon the actions I've taken in the past. And I wake up every day super grateful, really blessed, and I'm in overtime. It's like extra credit, overtime, whatever it is, and I think it's all a result of doing the work and genuinely just trying to help people, right? Like even when I started the media company, it came from a place of, I have a friend who was also sober, a long time sober, and he was working a job that he just couldn't stand. And it was like spiritually bankrupting him. And I was helping him a lot, right? Just coaching him, just talking to him, just all the time, every day, multiple times a day. And he had this background in, doing video work, and he's an incredibly creative guy, just an amazing leader of people, and was working the sales job he hated, right? That was like soul crushing to him. And I came from a place of like, whatever it takes to design something to give him some freedom from that, right? And so I started, my brain just, kind of works in that way. I'm a systems guy. I had no background in media or marketing, but I had a background in just creating structures, and I genuinely wanted to help them, right? And so an entire media company grew out of that, right? Oak Forest Recovery. That is an entire organization that grew out of me sponsoring and just helping dudes, right? So everything in my life today is the result of, right, genuinely just trying to help another individual, right? And what can come from that is just, I mean, it blows me away, right? Like blows me away, because in my past lives where I was totally miserable, irritable, discontented, and just unsatisfied, it was all about me, right? It was all about me. I was not in anything that I was doing to benefit or help somebody else. It was like, I'm in here and I'm doing this because I gotta make some more money, or I need some power and prestige, or it was all about me, right? And that leads to a life that just, at least for me, doesn't go anywhere, right? And I am a feel good junkie, right? And you put me in a place of feeling not good for long enough, and I will find a way to feel good. And my default programming, right, is like, I want some drugs, right? So I'm super blessed, man. And it's, life's not always easy, right? When you find yourself, at a place where you found success in sobriety, right? There's lots of difficult challenges, right? Lots of fear that crops up. How do you be a man who is in recovery, who is always about, doing the principled right thing, always about helping people, and pay your bills, and make payroll, and right? And there's this, it's an interesting cross section, right? It's a very interesting cross section of, okay, I'm a very principled spiritual person. I need to trust God. I also need to make payroll, and I'm in a lot of fear. And combining these two things has been a journey, and it's been the next level of my recovery, right? And walking out into, I think when you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, a CEO, so much of it is like, you kind of feel like you're Columbus, sailing out into the promised land. You have no idea where it is. It is complete darkness. There is no roadmap. And like rogue waves come, stormy seas, the boat is leaking. You got, you know what I mean? And you're like, all right, like God's got it. Let's keep going. And it can be really, really frightening sometimes. I can wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, like I want to go back into self-will, right? I want to like, no, I need to self-will this. And self-will never really gets me very far, right? And I was having this conversation with one of my sponsees last night, right? It was like, fear crops up, right? Character defects crop up. And, I have a roadmap today, not for how to run a business, but for how to stay spiritually centered, right? And when I follow that roadmap to stay spiritually centered, it seems like everything else in my life works out really well, right? But fear crops in and is like, no, not this time. No, not this. You need to grab the wheel. You need to steer the boat, right? And thank God I have so many great sober people around me that I'm so connected to, that I check all my thinking with, that, get me back on the beam, get me back into spiritual principles. And then everything works out and my life continues to grow. Right. And all the problems, the icebergs that are in the ocean, I end up not hitting. Right. So,
I think,
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you're such a miracle. Your whole story is so incredible. And I think just to like wrap up this conversation and two things that I just heard you say. One, at least this is my experience, is that the business of living sober and having emotional sobriety is this delicate dance between using in the most productive way possible our God-given intellect and gifts, and aligning that with our intuition or whatever the divine sort of guidance we receive as a result of working a 12-step program. And when if there's a big beautiful block, inside of my head that represents the intellect, and it's got light shining through it, and then deep in my belly there's a big beautiful block, and that represents my intuition, the higher power that lives inside of me. When the blocks are stacked on top of each other, there's this clear channel of guidance that can come down from the top and also rise back up, that is steering my life. And at any given moment, on any given day, depending on my level of spiritual fitness, those two blocks might be out of alignment, in which case all bets are off on how I'm going to behave in the world, what opportunities are going to sort of come and go as a result of my fear and my ego, as you're talking about. And so I really do think that is sort of the finesse and the nuance of having a big, beautiful, sober life that you kind of just touched on. And it's an every 24 hours type of thing, no doubt. And the other thing that you said that I also think is so important for every human on earth, and we hear it again and again and again, we hear the wealthiest, most successful people, the famous people, say all the time that they get to the top and they're completely alone. And it's fucking miserable up there, and it's cold and it's dark. And that when we pursue, just as a human on this planet, things outside of us to fill us up, it is a dead end road for a big, beautiful, happy life. And if we can cultivate a closeness to our highest self, however that looks for you, listener, that helps tell us what we want for our life, not what culture told us we should go get, or our family of origin, not the big house and the marriage and or whatever, not necessarily, but something that's coming from us that feels true to us. And we let that be the thing that guides us in our decision-making. We then have access to real power, real joy, real connection, which in my opinion is the reason why we're here, as you said, and the very opposite of addiction. So I just love your story so much. And I know your time is limited, and I appreciate you coming on here. It was such a great conversation, and I'm really excited to hear it.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciated it. It's been great.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely see you soon. RJ and I go to the same gym, so we'll be pumping iron at each other.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay. I'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
I wanna help you, but I don't know how. I wanna guide you, but I can't figure it out. So tell me what you need, and tell me where you bleed, and I will listen. I can listen. Oh, I will listen to you. You seem so stuck there, holding on to some old story, still going strong. So tell me what you did, and tell me how you lived, and I will listen. I can listen. Oh, I will listen to you. Where can you go now? Can I keep you from falling down? If you just keep floating, you won't drown. There's a knowing that can be found. If you listen, can you listen? Oh, I will listen to you. There's a voice deep inside you that will be there to guide you. So tell me, what do you hear? Can you quiet your worst fear? If you listen, can you listen? Oh, I will listen to you. Where can you go now? Can I keep you from falling down? If you just keep floating, you won't drown. There's a knowing that can be found. If you listen, I can listen. Oh, I will listen.